Thank you, Manny, and thank you to all our panelists for providing that tour, if you will, of their respective museums. I'd like to take, ask a few questions. I've already circulated these with the panelists, and they are somewhat general, but I do want to kind of delve a little bit more into depth into the guiding philosophies that drive both your leadership and your specific cultural center. I teach courses on Native American and museums, Indigenous self-representation, and the changing historical relationship between Indigenous people and museums. So I really appreciate that point, Manny, that you made about us having a love-hate relationship with museums. That is exactly true. Obviously, we love them because they have our stuff, and we hate them for the same reason. And so I think, as I work through the term with my students, I actually study the Makah Museum in this course. There's 2 wonderful books out on the Makah Cultural Center by Patricia Pierce Erickson and Ann Tweedy, and I'd encourage you to check those out as well. And also, as I said, Janine's authored some really important works on that institution. And then also, Travis, I've studied the Mille Lacs Indian Museum for my own book project. And one of the things that comes up repeatedly in discussions as students and also people who are just really interested in this tribal museum movement, if you will, as it's been called, is that each of these institutions have its own unique identity. And one of the questions that always comes up, did they build this museum for their own community, or did they build it for outsiders? Did they build it for both? So I wanted to maybe if we could explore that question a little bit more, that question that my students have been posing over the years, about your intended audience, and also how that then influences the types of narratives or stories that you present at your institution.
I think that's a good question, Amy. And everyone on our reservation would say that the Makah Cultural and Research Center is built for the Makah tribe, for the Makah people. But clearly, the exhibits were designed to educate a broader audience. The elders and the tribal council back in the 70s were just excited about what was being excavated. And we're very, very proud of what we could teach people from that. And so, we... because we're a cultural center and not just a museum, as I mentioned, we have the language program and we have the archive. So much of our work so much of what we do, what we collect, and how we manage it is for the benefit of the Makah tribe. A lot of our archival resources are used on a regular basis to protect our treaty rights. So they're sort of there for a legal and political reason, as well as for getting people in touch with what we have from their great-grandparents and the photographs and the recordings and that kind of thing. But the idea of even bringing people through and offering them a really wonderful opportunity to learn about early Makah life, we think makes them better citizens. For them to learn about technology, Makah technology, when you learn about the fish hooks and how they were designed not just to target a specific species, but to target even a size within that species for long-term consumption through the wintertime. So it allows people to, I think, appreciate Native Americans in a way that they didn't before, that not only benefits our tribe, but neighbors and other folks as well. So, and we're lucky, we're not located on you don't just pass through Nia Bay. You deliberately go to Nia Bay. And so we don't get very many people who wander in and say, where are the teepees? We kind of get people who understand a little bit about the Northwest already, or maybe read something and, have kind of a healthier curiosity than maybe if you were just on a big interstate and you got the other types of visitors. Not that they don't sometimes have arguments at the front desk with our people, and we have somebody at the front desk who kind of likes to have arguments with visitors. They could ask an innocent question and they'll engage in a little, battle over who really stressed those resources. And so I would say that it really is for our benefit. But so many of our elders were the ones who were excited about sharing this, showing off. I remember when anybody would go to my grandma's house, she'd say, have you been to our museum yet? Not that it was our museum, it was ours. And so it was, they were the ones who were proud. And it wasn't like they were trying to prove anything. They just wanted people to see the beauty from our culture. So I would say that we take seriously both of those roles of being there for our community and then providing really quality educational and interpretive opportunities for others.
I think it's the same, for the Navajo Nation. I think it's pretty much the same for many tribal museums, is that we're there for our communities first. And I mean, but that doesn't exclude anybody. We're just giving our own quote unquote narrative as to what we're doing. If you're coming to the Navajo Nation Museum, you're going to hear history from our perspective. If you go to the Hopi Museum, you're going to hear history from their perspective. And so that's just how it is. And whether or not tourists come through, that's cool, And I think for the Navajo Nation, one of the things which I love, by the way, and it's stuff that would happen with some of my non-native friends that come through. And the thing I love is kind of like seeing them kind of freak out when they're the minority, when they're literally the minority in that place. And you can see it in guests, non-native eyes when you see them walking up the sidewalk to come to our museum. They're kind of like, oh, is this the right thing? And they're just trying to be very careful, and they're sensitive. Most of them are very sensitive. Like, oh, is this? And so I always talk to my staff about, okay, here they come, get ready. get the war bonnet on and jump out. No, but I talk to them about, you got to understand where they're coming from and, help them out. And it's just a human thing, It's like me going to, used to be in New York City, country mountain. I still am. I act like I'm all, I know how to go to New York City, but still, would get lost and get scared. But anyway. So the narrative, narratives, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I do want to say this about narrative, is that I don't want to go for the obvious, And people always say they think as museum directors have never thought about this. You get this person that comes up and says, you know what you should do? You should put out a survey and see what the people want, And it's just like, why do I want to do that? I already know they're going to want to talk about the Long Walk. They're going to know about Navajo textiles. They want to know about Navajo silksmithing, But if I put out that survey, would they ever say, you should do Star Wars in Navajo? No, never. So, you kind of gotta be the gauge as the director of your institution as to what's right for your community.
Well, I think for the Mille Lacs Indian Museum and Trading Post, since we're part of the Minnesota Historical Society, I think the original intent was for, visitors, outside visitors from the community. But what the opportunity then is to take that and to use that institution then and turn it more into a cultural center and make it more community friendly. Like we have language tables at our museum. We do orientations for everybody that gets hired by the band has to come through orientation through our museum type of thing. We once a week the Boys and Girls Club from the Mille Lacs band comes and visits the museum, and we do different things with them. So, I think that's both the challenge and the opportunity then is to utilize it and to make it more of a community thing. We work a lot with the community through the Trading Post, and so we invite artists and residents to come through. We do traveling exhibits with artists, that type of thing. So, again, I think it's both. And the narrative at the museum that we tell is, a great opportunity for the community to tell their stories and to see themselves reflected in the museum's always important. One of the things I kind of missed when I talked about the introduction is we have an incredible Four Seasons room, and you made me think about when you're talking about the way your museum's laid out at the Makah Center about seasonal. But within that Four Seasons room, we take people and we talk about different, traditional activities during each part of the seasons. From the springtime, from sugar bushing, gathering sap and making syrup and sugar, to fishing in the summer, wild ricing in the fall, that type of thing. But there's mannequins. It's a life-size diorama, and there's mannequins in there that were actually molded from band members, from people from the communities in the 1970s. So it's really neat to have. Last year I gave a tour to one of the persons that was in the summer scene as a small girl, and she was there with her daughter, and afterwards, after the tour, I heard her saying, "That's me, that's your mom there." You know, I was the one that was cast for that mannequin. So, you know, so I think it's both. And I think one of the things that I was just listening the other day to, I don't know where it was on C-SPAN or something, but they were having, it was at the Heard Museum, they were having a panel on Indians in stereotypes in sports. And Kevin Gover said, you know, visitors, director of the National Museum of the American Indian, he said, visitors to the museum come informed, but a lot of times they come misinformed. And so I think that's our responsibility then, having that museum is to be able to, maybe challenge some of those stereotypes people have or give them more accurate information about who we are.
No, thank you for that. That Kevin Gover quote reminds me of one of the Bruce Bernstein quotes that I've heard over the years, that Native Americans are perhaps the most well-known aspect of American history, but the least understood. And I think that is certainly very true. If I could go rogue for a second and ask you guys to respond to a question that I've been getting over the years when I've been doing my presentations on museums and kind of just talking about the types of narratives that tribes are choosing to represent in their institutions. One of the issues I raise is, what I believe is the importance of talking about the hard truths of colonization, talking about colonialism and its ongoing effects. And then sometimes, as we know, those types of narratives can be very, very challenging for the visitors. And as I present, usually I get questions from people who may know a tribal museum director at a different institution who says, well, actually, we've decided we don't want to talk about those types of painful and challenging aspects of our history, or I heard this tribal museum director say that, because we don't want to make our visitors feel bad, or we don't want to lose sight of the take-home message that we feel is so important, that take-home message of survivance. And so I'm wondering, I know, again, this wasn't on the list that I gave you, but I'm just wondering, as we were talking about the types of narratives that you guys are presenting, how do you feel about that in terms of the decision-making about the types of narratives that you present? Do you think that a museum is an effective or an appropriate place for Indigenous communities and the larger society to really kind of face this kind of difficult history of colonialism?
We could just keep going this way. I personally, I do, but I realize that no matter what kind of training and discussions you have with your staff, it really varies so much. I mean, it's just incredibly complex. We can talk generally about the Indian agents. So agents were stationed on our reservation from 1855 to 1934, I believe. And the early ones really weren't bad, but I think it's because our traditional economy was strong. They basically were advocates for us. They said these folks are thriving. We should just support their efforts. They're successful whale hunters. They're very wealthy because of the fur seal trade. So, those early agents were not horrible. They didn't implement government policy in a way that was suppressive, but later ones did. So if you want to look at Indian agents and what they did at Makah Reservation, that's a complicated story in and of itself. And then even if you look at language, and you have staff people who look at it so different than I do. Some will say, yeah, they sent our people to boarding schools and they would stop them from speaking the language, and they really did a horrible number on our tribe. And I'm going, but wait a minute, think about how the language persisted. Think about the strength of some of those elders that managed to maintain it and even through those difficult times. So you can talk about strength and survival, or you can talk about suppression and bad people doing bad things. So, it's very, everybody has a different perspective. But I think those issues are good for tribal museums to tackle, better for us than anybody else, I think. And yet you're right, we don't want to scare visitors away. In an introductory panel that we did, we had the Spaniards that were there in the 1790s, and some of the original text that we used was too strong for our board. They didn't want to, they made us tone down the language just a little bit, which we kind of felt bad about. But at the same time, you don't know what messages scare people. For example, and this is not related to museum exhibits, but there was a little project on our reservation community, and every community in America has issues with substance abuse. I think most of us know that, most intelligent people know that. And so there were signs that the teenagers did through the teen center or something that said, that were anti-drug messages that would, and they were cute. They painted them themselves and they put them up around the reservation. Apparently that scared the heck out of a bunch of visitors to our reservation. And I'm going, I think it's a positive thing. It's neat that they're trying to communicate to each other or be, but it wouldn't have occurred to me that that would scare visitors. We get people that come to the Cape or to go surfing. They don't all come to the museum, and they're not all so enlightened, I guess. But, you don't always know what people can handle. You think it's a positive message, and apparently sometimes it sends them running in the other direction. So, but anyway, I agree that those things that are even difficult politically and, should be tackled by us.
Yeah, to me, that's a no-brainer, to talk about difficult issues. If I had a staff member or a person who wanted to do an exhibit on a difficult subject, I would not have an issue letting it happen. But I would, obviously as a director, keep an eye on it to make sure it's not going to make somebody's head explode, So, so that's to me, that's a no-brainer. And it's the topic of colonization, which is the hot academic term right now. Seems like every college student comes back and says, we're colonized and we need to not be colonized. And I'm like, okay, yes. So, but what's funny about what they're saying is stuff that our elders always said. My grandma said, well, you need to get up and get to work, and you need to go out there and before the sun comes up and do this and do that. And so it's just like they already understood colonization, but they didn't know the formal word in English. So that it's just like, of course, if it's a difficult part of anybody's history, in order to deal with it, we need to release it in order for things to be healed and move on.
Minnesota Historic Society. If you don't know much about that, the founding fathers, of the Historic Society were the same founding fathers of the state of Minnesota. One which was, Governor Ramsey, that basically said the Dakota need to be exterminated and run out of the state of Minnesota after the U.S.-Dakota War. So,
and the Ho-Chunk, too, on my track, too.
Oh, yeah. So, it's interesting at our museum to be able to talk about some of those things. We don't necessarily do it in the exhibit, which I think is a disservice, because sometimes when you look at exhibits, it says a lot about what's not there or what's not talked about in an exhibit as much as what is there and what is talked about. And so, for the Mille Lacs Band, there was a incident called we call it the tragedy at Sandy Lake, which was part of the Mille Lacs reservation, where they brought a bunch of Ojibways together throughout Minnesota and Wisconsin they were supposed to get their annuity payments there. The annuity payments didn't arrive on time. A lot of people got sick. Winter set in. People had to, be walked back home to Wisconsin, and a couple hundred people died that winter. You'll see nothing about that in our museum. And so that's something that I'm trying to challenge the Minnesota Historic Society to say, hey, that's an important part of the history of this band that needs to be talked about, and how we talk about it or how we may do an exhibit about it or whatever, I think is going to be the challenging part. But, again, I think that we have to use these museums as places to talk about those incidences in history.